I would love to actually sit down with everyone who drafted our Constitution and say, hey guys, what did you really mean when you drafted that Second Amendment? Because we had a bunch of people in modern times who can't seem to figure that out.
They would probably be very saddened by our current educational standards.
They'd be like, what part don't you understand? We wrote it real
We figured that was going to be the easiest one to interpret.
Exactly.
Welcome to the Defenders and Disciples podcast. If you're already a subscriber, then thank you so much for your support. And if you're not subscribed and it's your first time with us, then please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button down below. And also hit the bell for notifications, because if you don't know, YouTube really doesn't like channels like this and they like to suppress this content. In this episode, I'm joined by William Kirk, aka Bill from Washington Gun Law. William is a practicing attorney in Washington State and has either been prosecuting criminal matters or representing criminal defendants since 1998. And the Seattle Metropolitan Magazine has selected Bill 19 years in a row now as a Washington State super attorney. After creating a very successful trial practice, Bill shifted his focus towards Second Amendment cases in 2019 when he founded Washington Gun Law. And he is now one of the leading educators on self-defense law and other gun rights issues. During our conversation, we discussed several topics, including the biggest threat to our nation, commonly overlooked aspects of self-defense, whether we are winning or losing the Second Amendment battle and what individuals can do to help, what to do after a self-defense incident, myths surrounding Miranda warnings, whether custom gun modifications could hurt your self-defense case, ATF rulemaking, and much more. And now I give you Attorney William Kirk. Hey Bill, how you doing today, sir?
I am doing well. Thank you so much for having me here.
It's awesome to have you on the show. I'm glad you could join me.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Before we get started, I'm going to go through some of these, I call them icebreaker questions. You ready?
All right. Yeah, sure. Let's do this.
All right. So first off, what do you think is the biggest threat to our nation?
What I think the biggest threat to our nation is right now is ignorance. I think that there is a political movement afoot designed to strip citizens of their inalienable rights. And I believe that there's a handful of people who support that movement because they really do have evil and nefarious intent. However, I believe a large majority of their followers feed from a trough of disinformation and simply just have complete ignorance to the value of our inalienable rights and what really makes us unique as a nation. And I think social media and mainstream media contribute to that level of ignorance to a large degree. And also does just the laziness that comes with being an American and just wanting your media, your news in 5-second little bite-sized pieces. Many people read only the headlines and never actually get into the story. So to me, the biggest threat right now to our way of life is ignorance by a large majority of our population.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that the only book most people read is Facebook, unfortunately.
Yeah. Valuable information out there.
Yeah. Let's go on the next one. What do you think is a commonly overlooked aspect of self-defense?
Yeah, the most commonly overlooked aspect of self-defense is this, is everyone goes to the range and works with trainers all the time to stay out of the morgue. Awesome. What they don't do is they don't do the equal amount of training to stay out of prison. And so what I mean by that is everybody, regardless of what state you're in, on an annual basis, at least once a year, should take a class on the self-defense laws in that particular state. Make sure that it's ingrained into your mind. And sometimes, depending on your state, they have a tendency to be a moving target, depending on what happened in the legislative session. So, as for those that geek out on my channel, you know that I preach lawful and responsible gun ownership, and that does mean knowing the law in every situation and how it does apply to you in any instance that you may find yourself.
No, absolutely. I agree with that too. I think there's a lot of rumor mill and myths surrounding what certain legal terms, be it castle doctrine or whatever the case may be, and people, they promulgate these myths rather than actually go to the law and see what the law says.
Yeah, and sometimes, with all due respect to the trainers out there who I think do a fantastic job on the tactical side of things, I think sometimes they get the legal information wrong. They're relying on second, third-hand information. I've had many people in seminars that I put on come to me and say, well, my instructor told me A, B, and C, and I got to look them right in the face and say, well, I'm sorry, but your instructor's just flat out wrong about that one. and here's the law, and here's what it really says. So, I think everyone should stay in their lane. A heart surgeon is a fantastic surgeon, but it doesn't mean they can do brain surgery. So, the trainers are fantastic. Everyone should utilize their services to get trained on the tactical aspects of what you need to do, but rely on the lawyers to train you on the legal side of stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. We're going to get more into that in a little bit. But the next one is, what is one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Invest in Microsoft.
There you go. All right. That's a pretty good one.
No, listen, I remember I grew up here in Seattle, and I lived in Seattle when Seattle used to be a really cool town. And I remember when Microsoft was first getting off the ground and meeting all these 28, 29-year-old millionaires already. I'm like, damn, what's going on over at Microsoft, And I knew a few people around here who did get in early on it, and, they haven't worked for years. So that's what I would have told myself.
Doesn't Bill Gates have a house over there off the
Yeah, Bill Gates' home is about 5 miles from my office here.
Okay.
Actually. Yeah.
Is it on the coast of the Puget Sound?
No, it actually sits on Lake Washington. So just east
Lake
of
Washington.
downtown
Okay.
Seattle sits Lake Washington. He's in a neighborhood on Medina, which faces west back towards the city. It's a high rent district, obviously.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. Not a lot of double wides over there in those neighborhoods,
All right, so invest in Microsoft. That would be some good advice. If you could have dinner with someone who is dead or alive, who would it be?
Well, so my original answer was going to be Ronald Reagan, because I have just a massive affinity for Ronald Reagan. He was running for president when I was a very young person and kind of just becoming politically aware. I got politically aware at a really young age. And Ronald Reagan, to me, I have a son named Reagan, so I think that tells you what I think of him. But based upon what I've been through in the last year and a half, 2 years, just following all of this stuff, I would love to actually sit down. I'd love to have a banquet dinner, actually, with everyone who drafted our Constitution and say, hey, guys, what did you really mean when you drafted that Second Amendment? Because we had a bunch of people in modern times who can't seem to figure that out.
Yeah.
I think I know what the answer would be when you consider the time period in which it was drafted, when you consider what it was that we had just come out of. Do we really honestly think that we intended to have a bunch of limitations on it? It defies common sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm sure if you brought that up to them and said that how much difficulty we seem to have interpreting it, they would probably be very saddened by our current educational standards.
They'd be like, what part don't you understand? We wrote it real
We figured that was going to be the easiest one to interpret.
Exactly. It is the easiest one to remember.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Yeah, it's just, that's, I'd love to get into that too in a little bit. But the last one is, if you could master one skill overnight, what would it be?
I love music. I'm a very rough guitar player. Me and my boy Reagan play a lot, but I would love to get really good at that. If I just had the time, I would love to. I love music.
That's awesome. Yeah, my daughter, she's learning piano right now. And
yeah, that's a great instrument. I love the guitar. I love the piano because they're very versatile instruments. So whether you're into rock or country or jazz or whatever floats your boat, that's an instrument that works really well.
Well, it's remarkable too, like how easy it is to, well, obviously you still have to put in the effort to learn, but the resources that are out there, like she's using an app called, I think it's called Musician, and it's on the iPad, and it like listens for the notes. So like she'll play games on it, and it'll listen for the notes. It knows when she hits. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, and if you went to my YouTube feed, you'd probably see like, oh, he's got 4 Boxes Diner and Armed Scholar and all that stuff in his feed. No, it's mostly like Marty's music and stuff teaching me how to play songs. That's what I watch YouTube for mostly.
Well, awesome. Well, let's talk about how your background, how you got into law, and how that eventually evolved into what you do now, which is educate people on YouTube on legal defense and what's going on in case law with the Second Amendment.
Yeah, so it's a funny story in a way. So I'd always wanted to be a lawyer, even as far back as high school. I went to college here at Washington State University. I went back to law school at Gonzaga University. And then I had an opportunity to go work as a King County prosecutor here in Seattle for a gentleman named Norm Mailing, who was absolutely the best prosecutor we ever had in the state of Washington. An amazing gentleman. It was a great honor to work for him, and really started getting into the courtroom, trying a lot of cases, and I liked it. The thrill of the battle was awesome. I had some natural skill set that allowed me to, perform well in a courtroom. Mm-hmm. And so I really got into being a trial lawyer, was hired away in 2000 by the godfather of DUI defense. And it wasn't that I was passionate about DUI defenses. At that point in my life, I was passionate about making money, starting a young family and stuff. And I carved out an amazingly successful DUI practice for a number of years, made a lot of money doing it. But around 2017, 2018, I started burning out, and I really realized that I'd been practicing law for years without really a cause behind it, because, who's rooting for the drunk driving lawyer?
Yeah.
Seriously, right? And I'd always been, as conservative nature, always been really into the Second Amendment, had an opportunity from another company to start doing some self-defense work, and I decided I had other law partners. I branded out Washington gun law separately because I wanted this endeavor to be my own endeavor. I didn't want to have my other partners involved in it, none of which are my partners anymore. So it was a wise move on my part. And one thing led to another. I had a really good website. And then there was the summers of 2020 and 21 here in Seattle where we were in lockdown mode, and all hell was breaking loose. And my phone was ringing off the hook at Washington gun law so crazy that I started the YouTube channel with the simple idea of, hey, just tell them on the voicemail if they're calling about driving into an Antifa rally to go check out the YouTube channel. I'll put the answer there for them. And I never expected the channel to turn into what it was. It wasn't until I actually started covering the solvent trap, Operation Reticent Recall issue, that I think my channel kind of went into a national following. And then I started realizing that there was just a lot of states where there was no one speaking for these people and no one educating these people. And the problem with the way we write laws is not only are they a moving target, but you literally need a law to English translation to understand what the hell are they saying, right? Yeah. And that's where I found a little niche where I could fall into and really just take very complicated case law, very complicated legislation, break it down into real simple English so that when people are done watching my videos, they can go, all right, now I know what the heck's going on here. And to me, it's an important role because I do believe that the Second Amendment debate is actually going to be won through education. It's not going to be won through legislation. It's not going to be won through litigation. It's not going to be won through intimidation. It's going to be won through education because the law, the Constitution, and common sense is all on our side. So we have to keep pounding away at that.
No, I like that. I like what you said about how important it is for people to be able to understand the laws and how the laws have just turned into this thing where you have to have a degree, almost like tax code, where you have to have a degree to be able to understand it. And I've always believed that I feel like there should almost be a layman test when it comes to laws. Like, can someone with a 9th grade education understand this? If they can't, then go rewrite it. Or maybe it shouldn't be a law. I mean, our system's already overbloated for one. And then just when they come up with these laws and they just don't make any sense, and a common person, for example, like the short-barreled rifle, like you and I, we're very familiar with the esoteric nature of NFA and all that, but my in-laws, they don't know that, and so for them, it's like you can't have a rifle with a barrel under 16 inches unless it's not a rifle and it's a pistol. But then you could put this brace on it, but then you swap that piece of plastic out with another piece of plastic, and now you just committed a felony that's punishable by 10 years in prison. Like, are you kidding me? And if someone could,
they have that agency just write a rule one day and completely change directions and
absolutely. Oh my gosh, I know. Well, and what's funny too is I was thinking about this the other day with the ATF in particular, and I was like, imagine if they put the same fervor they have towards firearms towards the other letters in that acronym, towards alcohol. Like
tobacco.
I mean, it's just so bizarre that for one, part of their jurisdiction is over something that we have it's listed second in the Bill of Rights, constitutional right to. And then, and I said before that, well, if you could push a button and you were going to push a button and let's say hypothetically it could ban something and make it stick, alcohol would theoretically save far more lives than banning firearms. Not to mention that many firearm-related deaths, either suicide or homicide or whatever, have alcoholic elements. And so it's like,
a former drunk driving lawyer, I can tell you about how many families alcohol has ruined.
Absolutely.
Countless families. And it's not just through violent accidents, it's just through addiction and what it does to a person and what it leads to and the health issues that come with alcohol abuse. No doctor is going to tell you that abusing alcohol is good for a long life. It's not.
No. And the number of calls that I went on as a cop that involved alcohol, be it domestic.
How many domestic violence offenses did you ever go to where somebody wasn't tuned up on alcohol?
Oh my gosh, it was always the case. It was always the case.
Every time.
And so the idea that like people, but I think that just goes to the disingenuous nature of either disingenuous or uneducated nature of why people pursue firearms or attack firearms is the thing to save lives, right? They don't understand the numbers, and then they don't actually think about the what is actually causing the most harm in this country.
Well, look at it this way. Okay, and I've got a couple of videos that say this, and the United States Department of Justice says that 88.8% of all gun crimes on an annual basis are committed by individuals who are unlawfully possessing the firearm at the time the crime is committed. So that's a very identifiable demographic group. We've identified the problem. So one would think then that we would write all of our laws to go after that 88.8% of the problem. 9 out of the 10 problems come from there, right? But no. Instead, we write 100% of our gun laws to affect guys like you and me.
Yep.
And we ain't the problem. And I can speak from experience because as many years being a drunk driving lawyer, I unfortunately had to represent people who would get drunk, cause accidents, and injure or kill people. I'm sure you responded to calls like that.
Several.
Okay. They're horrible.
Yeah.
Okay? Horrible. Nobody ever talks about banning booze or banning cars after one of those incidents happen. Nope, they go after the maniac who was behind the wheel, just like we should go after the maniac who's behind the trigger.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and I'm also glad you brought that up to slightly pivot again about, you having to defend drunk drivers. And, a lot of people would see that as reprehensible. Like, oh, how could you defend someone? It's like, it's so funny when it comes to your profession and half the time people are completely against what you're doing. Half the time people are completely for, and then it flip-flops. And it's like, it's a necessary profession. It's just like, I kind of relate it to almost like government regulations. And I do agree that government regulations are just like the bloated legal system, right? There's far too many of them. However, there are a lot that prevent bridges and buildings from falling on us. And so saying that all government regulations are bad, it's like, maybe not. And so there are necessary, I don't want to call your profession evil, but you know what I'm saying? There are necessary evils, I guess, in society that we have to have.
People who have to go out and clean out the septic tank too. Why?
Yeah.
Because that's a job that's necessary. What I always say is everybody hates lawyers until the day you need one.
Yes, exactly.
Then they love you, right? And I can't tell you how many people I've had over the years where, regardless of the crime, it was like, oh, that person got off on a technicality, person got off on a technicality, and suddenly when they're in that spot, that's not a technicality, it's a constitutional right. That's how it's labeled at that point. So I understand. You got to have thick skin to be in this profession.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
To your other point, though, about do we need government regulations? I'm very libertarian in nature. I think the smaller the government, the better.
Absolutely.
However, I agree that we need some form of it because we need to maintain our roads. We need law enforcement. We need fire departments. We need education systems. We need hospital systems. We need a set of rules that we as a society agree to follow, and then a set of penalties that we agree on for those who don't follow it.
Right.
And that is a form of government, regulating our behavior. And so there's always going to be some degree of that. The true laissez-faire type government is much like the true Marxist form of government, which is they exist only in theory, but they've never truly been applied practically to humanity at all.
Right. Yeah. It's two opposite ends of the spectrum. One being complete chaos and one being complete order.
Right. With no freedoms whatsoever.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
And a lot of people, like when they criticize systems like that, especially like the deconstructionists or postmodernists try to criticize what we have as a country, right? What the giants' shoulders that we stand on as a country. And I kind of equate it's like being in an airplane. Imagine someone's in an airplane and they don't know anything about airplanes, but they're just in an airplane, and all of a sudden they hit some turbulence. they're like, man, this turbulence is horrible. Like, and they look out the window and they see that wing flapping. They're like, you know what? I bet if we cut that thing off this thing, we wouldn't have any more turbulence because that thing seems to be causing all the turbulence. It's like, well, yeah,
you wouldn't.
You may not have any more turbulence, but
Yeah, you're just
you have a short flight.
Miles an hour though, so buckle up.
Yeah, but it's criticizing these complex systems that it's like a lot of people know nothing about and what is dependent upon those types of things. And so I think it's important to approach it from that way. And
the one thing that government always, the way we have to limit government, and I think there's a very simple formula as to where those limitations lie. And this is where I think those on the left miss it. I think those on the right still have faith in the individual, right? That the individual can control himself, that the individual is ultimately responsible for their own destiny. And yes, there will be some individuals who will fall through the crack, and there will be some individuals who have to be held accountable for falling through the cracks. Those on the left now have lost complete faith in the individual. They believe that we have to group think, group live, group believe, that the individual for somehow or another is incapable of governing themselves. And that has never been the case, not only in the United States, that's never been the case in the history of humanity.
Yeah.
It's an it's an inhumane position to take. And unfortunately, that's where I see the left going more and more by the day.
Yeah. I think you're right about that. And it is the groupthink. It is the sacrificing, your rights for the good of the collective type thinking.
Right.
It's unfortunate.
This has always been a manifest destiny country. It shall always remain. You control your own destiny. Yes, there are people from certain groups that are going to have to work harder to get ahead. That's just how life works. But if you're willing to put the work in, if you're willing to have that creativity, if you're willing to take those chances in this country, doesn't matter who you are, you can make it.
Well, unfortunately, too, they also will tell certain groups that they can't do it. They label them as victims, and then they get in their head, and it's like the more and more you tell yourself you're a victim, the more other people tell you that you're a victim, the more you're going to believe it, and then believe that, and that's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so that's the unfortunate thing that's happened as well.
Yeah, and that same group that tells you you're a victim has also for the last 60 years run your city and told you that any day now they're going to change things for you, but things seem to be getting worse. So, I mean, how much longer do you want to keep buying in on this message before you get to a point like, I don't know what we're going to do, but I think I know what we shouldn't do moving forward, right?
Yeah. I don't know if you can even answer this in simple terms, as simple a terms as I'm asking it, but do you think we're winning or losing the fight for the Second Amendment rights?
I knew you were going to ask this question. I actually did some soul searching on this one. I really did. I think we're winning.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you why. All right. I believe that we are winning because, one, many of the issues that we've always wanted to get finally resolved, we're finally pushing to that point of final resolution. And we're pushing it to that point in final resolution with the Supreme Court that I think is very well situated to protect what our founding fathers established for us. Okay, I think when you take a look at now, we have 29 states in the nation that are constitutional carry out of really only 30 that are politically capable of doing it. I think that's a fantastic thing. Now, what you see in the other states is kind of what I like to call the rat infestation phenomena, okay? And what I mean by that is if you went into a large building and you started pushing rats out of certain parts of the building as they conglomerate into more and more confined areas, their craziness, their misbehavior will accelerate. And so what you're seeing in states like California, out here in Washington, Illinois, who I think those folks have been subjected to some of the most evil state government ever known to America. Yeah. What you're seeing them is you're seeing them intensify their battle on the Second Amendment for really, I think it's just as a last bastion of trying to make sure that they maintain control of their populace. Okay, and so what you're seeing is more and more red states are advancing Second Amendment rights. You're seeing more and more blue states moving more and more rapidly towards civilian disarmament. But on top of that, you have a Supreme Court that I believe, if they accept these cases and follow their laws, follow the Constitution and their precedent, I think we win. So that's why I believe we're winning this battle. And I think there's a bit of desperation coming out of the left when you see some of these crazy laws that are being passed.
No, I agree, and I've had some debates with people on this. There's the Chicken Little crowd that is the sky's falling when it comes to gun rights, and I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, there are certainly instances where you have these more draconian gun laws being passed, but there's also a lot of instances where very pro-gun laws are being passed as well, and the people's right to bear arms is being reaffirmed in case law, and I mean it's so. I agree with you on that. I agree.
Like today and yesterday, I had videos come out involving some of the many cases that are sitting before the Supreme Court out of Illinois on the assault weapon ban. And in one case, you had the Illinois Sheriff's Association offer an amicus in support of the petitioner and against the Illinois Attorney General, saying, yes, the Supreme Court should take this case, and yes, by the way, you should throw this law out. And then today's video is on another Illinois case where the National Police Association has done the same thing. So you're beginning to see law enforcement. You've seen a lot of sheriff's departments come out against this. And so, yeah, you're seeing a more vocal criticism, and there is an empowerment that's going on. And it's, again, I think this is happening because of education. I think more people geek out on not just my channel, but there's a lot of other really good channels out there, and learn the constitutional structure of this country, learn the case law. You will begin to realize that, yes, the law is on our side.
Yeah, it's always encouraging when law enforcement organizations are getting involved with that and reaffirming citizens' rights. That's
and who best to know how to combat crime?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? If the law enforcement agency, as they said in both of these memorandums, are saying, hey, listen, this doesn't do anything to make our jobs easier. This is just, why don't you just allow us to enforce the laws that we got on the books, and that will be good enough. And that's that's one. It's an argument where you go, well, that makes a lot of sense, but then you got to consider the source. I mean, these are the people on the streets, in the trenches, actually fighting day to day to keep our streets safer. Who better to know how to do this than them?
Yeah. There's sometimes I would when I'd make a traffic stop and the person would pull out their carry permit or something, and I would ask them hey, do you have your gun on you? And I've had some times where people said they didn't have it on them, and I would ask them, why not? You have your permit. And it was so funny because they would be like, why is this police officer asking me, why I don't have my gun on me? But it's if you have the permit, why do you not have it on you? That permit's not doing you any good. So, yeah, I was always trying to remind myself that, when they say the thin blue line, some people try to use that as saying, well, it's the thin blue veil between, where you hide. It's no, it's the thin blue line between order and chaos. It is. It is. It's protecting from too much order and also protecting from too much chaos, and understanding the importance of the Fourth Amendment, and not seeing the Fourth Amendment as some pesky thing that I need to work around, but understanding that is the foundation of this country.
Yep.
Or one of the foundations of this country.
And then consider this. In many communities, we've now defunded our police departments. Seattle right now is down to half the size of police officers that they were a few years ago. Washington State right now ranks 50th of any state in officer per capita, which that means that armed citizens are going to more likely be the first responders to many of these scenes, okay? And so think about what's going on in many of these states, my state included. We're defunding our police department at the same time trying to disarm our lawful citizens. One would almost think that they're trying to kill us.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah. Gun laws make the legislator, whoever passed it, morally complicit with crime. It would be like if someone were to break into someone's house and I were to push pause and I were to go into the house, take the person's gun away, and be like, all right, push play, and then let it play out. It's the same thing. You are disarming someone and preventing themselves from being able to defend themselves. And most people in that situation, that hypothetical situation I just described, would say that I am at least complicit with that, if not guilty of helping the criminal.
I think those that have legalized the hard drug use or turned a blind eye to the hard drug use, they know the criminal element that comes with drug use. They know what comes with the drug culture. They know the amount of property crimes and things like that increase when your drug use increases. They're complicit in all of that too. That's not a secret to anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really unfortunate. You talked about some of the cases that you're following right now. Can you talk about some more that are currently going on that our viewers might be interested in?
Cases that your viewers need to be aware of, obviously, is United States v. Rahimi, case that was argued in front of the United States Supreme Court a couple months ago. That is a case that the mainstream media has really kind of gotten wrong as far as what it's really all about. Now, a lot of people, I think, also think it's about more than it is. Rahimi's, the lawyers, I think, made a critical error at the lower level, and they kind of waived any arguments on the procedural challenges that could come with red flag laws and anti-harassment orders. But it is a case that I think Rahimi's going to lose, and yet I think most lawful, responsible gun owners in the United States will win because of it, because I do believe that we will carve out a disarmament allowance for those individuals who are deemed dangerous.
Okay.
But that dangerous standard will be based upon their actual conduct, not the color of their skin or their religious beliefs like we used to do it. But I think that those people who are irresponsible or have been unlawful in the past will either not be subject to disarmament or will find roads to restoration because of the Rahimi case. So I think that's a big one. Loper Bright Enterprises v. Raimondo is a case that a lot of gun people didn't catch because it's a fishing industry case, okay? But what's at stake there is the Chevron deference, the constitutionality of the Chevron deference, which is where basically courts for years have allowed administrative agencies to interpret their own regulations. So when we go back to agencies like the ATF, where do they always err on the side of? Well, they always err on the side of the ATF and against the gun owner. What it actually is it's a violation of separation of powers because you're allowing an executive agency to engage in judicial functions. So the Loper Bright case has an opportunity to throw the Chevron deference out forever, and that will significantly remove a huge chunk of the ATF's playbook. Okay. And then the cases that we don't have reviews on yet, but one is United States v. Daniels, that deals with whether cannabis users should be disarmed. And I think that's an important issue because we've got a bunch of states now that have gone to legalize cannabis. My state's one of them. And there's that strange dichotomy between state and federal law that really needs to be smoothed over. There's another case called Range versus Attorney General of the United States. That's a case that deals with a nonviolent felon who actually had like food stamp fraud from 30 years ago and was never allowed to restore his firearm rights. And he had that decision was overturned by the lower courts. The United States government appealed it. The court has not accepted it yet, so we're waiting to see whether they're going to accept that. And then, of course, out of Illinois, we have a multitude of assault weapon bans and magazine bans, which is obviously issues that need to be resolved right now. So that could be Beavis v. Naperville, Harrell v. Raoul, Barnett v. Raoul, Calkins v. Pritzker. Any one of those cases I'm keeping my eye on also.
I'm going to link some of those below for you guys. But what do you think of the Preventing Paramilitaries Act of 2024? That's one that I did a video on. I'd love your opinion on that.
Yeah, no, it's just another way of disarming because here's what they're really trying to do. If you take a look at the states that are doing this, first thing they're going to do is they're going to create some kind of a pre-purchase licensing requirement where before you can go buy a gun, you need to get government's permission, which is in and of itself unconstitutional. Then, of course, to get the license, they're going to make you have to go through mandatory live fire training. And I am a huge proponent, I know you are too, there's no such thing as too much training, okay? But to mandate training as a condition precedent to the exercise of a right, that's not how things were set up to be.
Turns a right into a privilege.
Right, exactly. So if all of a sudden you can only get your training from a state-certified agency, and that state-certified agency only has it every couple of months, and now it's booked out for 3 years, and no paramilitary training or anything like that. Because if you take a look at what they act like, oh, we're just trying to keep the white supremacists from starting their own militias, okay? Well, first of all, most states, by the way, actually have provisions against that already on state law, all right? But what they're really also doing is they're talking about any type of firearm or tactical training. And that ultimately will lead people where I got to wait 4 years to get my class done before I can go get my license so that I can then go buy a gun.
Yeah. Attempted legislation like that, it's so audacious that I just feel like there should be a penalty for it. You know, if I obviously violated someone's rights as a police officer, I would go to prison for good reason because that's not okay. But yet we have these legislators that do this or try to do this and see what sticks. And they can do it again and again and again and not have any repercussions whatsoever. It's maddening.
And the problem is like with this paramilitary training, they'll do it under the guise of we're fighting against white supremacy. Well, I would ask any of your listeners or viewers to go out and take a look at the demographic breakdown of the last 3 mass shooters in the United States.
Absolutely.
because they weren't white supremacists. They were they, them.
People don't want to admit that, though. That's uncomfortable.
Doesn't fit the narrative, man. You know, that's probably fit the narrative.
Yeah. Speaking of two-way rights and legal protection and stuff like that, so there's a lot of companies out there that offer self-defense, either insurance or self-defense legal protection, and I've done a whole video on that, the differences between the two, and people know which one I advocate for, which is the actual attorneys being on your side instead of an insurance company. But are you aware of, or could you see the possibility of there being a company that would have almost like a two-way legal protection? So like you would do, similar to these other ones where you would pay a monthly fee or something, and if you got hemmed up on the ATF got a wild hair one day and decided that pistol braces were illegal, and then you had to go to court for that whole process, you may win, but you're now have to pay all these legal fees. Like, have you ever heard of anyone trying to do that, or could you see that being a possibility?
Yeah, I got to be a little careful on this topic because I used to work for one of the companies and I had a falling out with them, so I don't want to really be talking
No worries, I completely understand.
And then I may be going to work for a different one of the companies, but I'm not allowed to say right now.
Sure.
So I'm going to have to really tiptoe lightly on this one. I do believe I have seen instances in which some of those companies have covered individuals on firearms-related matters that were not self-defense related, like they were accused of having an unlawful ghost gun or something like that. They were carrying a magazine that exceeded the capacity limit of that state. I have seen companies doing that. The question would be really for an individual, what is the likelihood that they're going to need that service? What's the likelihood that they're going to be the chief plaintiff on a massive suit that goes all the way to the United States Court of Appeals, right? And oftentimes you have groups that will take those causes on at no cost to the actual plaintiff. They just need the plaintiff. So like if you see Gun Owners of America, Second Amendment Foundation, Firearms Policy Coalition, National Association for Gun Rights, those are the four that are just really filing lawsuits left and right, okay? They're taking those cases pro bono.
Gotcha.
They're not charging that, and yeah, they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. So if you take a case all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, you're probably close to $1 million in legal fees when you figure all the lawyers that had to work on it. But no, that's going to be all raised through donations and things like that, which is why for any of your listeners and viewers out there who want to support organizations that are truly fighting for them, the four I mentioned are for that. The criteria I use is always, hey, whose names do I see on the pleadings? Because those are the people that are obviously in court fighting like crazy for our rights. And I see Second Amendment Foundation, Firearms Policy Coalition, Gun Owners of America, National Association for Gun Rights. Those are the four I just see over and over and over on pleadings. Take your small mom-pop FFL in some podunk town out in rural whatever state you're in, and now you've banned assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, and now because of that, all the inventory comes off the shelf. They can't even make a living anymore, okay? And he wants to sue to overturn the law. Well, the dude doesn't even have two nickels to rub together. How is he going to file this lawsuit and take it all the way to the top unless somebody's willing to do that for him?
Yeah. Speaking of the individual, what do you think the individual can do that's watching this to get involved, obviously vote, but it seems to be the case that it's very tempting for people to, argue online or whatever and not really get involved in the civic process and petitioning their lawmakers. What are some practical steps you would recommend someone to do to get involved with that?
Yeah, no, I think that what everybody can do, it can be summed up in one word, and it's educate. Okay? I think that if all of you folks out there, you got your liberal friends, they like to use their liberal talking points. So when it comes to guns, almost all of them will be talking from a point of ignorance. And if you're a lawful and responsible gun owner, if you're a compassionate gun owner, this is an opportunity to maybe take them to the range or at least sit down and give them the opportunity and do what I do on my channel. Don't tell them how to think, but give them all the stuff to think about. And candidly, when they come to the conclusion themselves, they're far more invested in it than they're ever going to be if you've shoved it down their throat. So, every Friday, take your liberal friend to the range day or something like that. Take them to a self-defense law class. Let them know that there are millions and millions of gun owners who aren't these crazy right-wing freaks that they all picture in their head, that they're just normal everyday Americans and teach them this. And there are 3 universal truths, okay? Everyone wants universal truths, and we rarely find them, okay? But these 3, I think, are universal truths. Number 1, and if I was talking to you, I'd say, listen, your life, your individual life is worth saving and preserving, right? We agree with that, don't we? Because every life is unique. Every single life is a unique life, and it's worth preserving, okay? Number 2, the way of life that you have chosen for you and your family, how you want to raise your family and all of that, that is also worth preserving. Okay? We all agree with that. And the third universal truth is the only one responsible for protecting and preserving all of that is you.
Yeah.
Those are universal truths. Now, whether that inspires you to go out and be an everyday carrier or it just inspires you to go get some pepper spray, I don't care. You got to be you, right? You got to be you. But there's only one person that's truly capable of protecting you and your family, and that is you. And you need to be prepared to do so.
Yep. You are your own first responder.
Yes.
You are the first one on scene.
Yeah, every time.
Going back to the biggest threats to our nation in ignorance and what you just said about education, are there any specific resources? Obviously, your channel, which you're doing, I mean, there's tons of resources on that, but any books that you recommend or anything else for people getting educated on that?
Well, I will tell you, he's got a channel. His name's Mark Smith. It's 4 Boxes Diner. Mark's done a couple of different books. I've had an opportunity to read them. I think Mark does an excellent job of going back and talking about the importance of the Second Amendment from a historical perspective, and then also kind of analyzing it, taking a look at a historical perspective and modern day application. But really, the most important thing, and this is the thing that I want all of your listeners really to understand, is so frequently we want to focus on what's coming out of the Biden administration, what's happening with the ATF. We think our rights are going to get taken from us from the top down. Take it from a person out here in Washington State, though, that will tell you that actually your rights are taken from you often from the bottom up. Okay? And so don't ignore those local elections. Do not ignore those local elections. I mean, even all the way down to the school boards, okay? Because it starts there and it works its way on up like a bad cancer. So don't take your eye off those local elections. Get behind your candidates, fund those candidates, because ultimately, if no matter what state you're in, the most likely way that you're going to have your Second Amendment rights stripped from you is from your state government, not so much necessarily from the federal government. Okay, so I did a video a couple weeks ago. It's about a whole slew of crazy civilian disarmament pieces of legislation that are kicking around in Tennessee. And someone had clickbaited me on a headline. I'm like, Tennessee's really talking about it? So I went in and started doing my own homework, and then I realized, well, actually every piece of legislation came from either one representative or one state senator. You probably know who they are, okay? And then you take a look at the political breakdown of the House and Senate, and you're like, there's no way these pieces of legislation are getting passed, okay? This has a snowball's chance in hell.
DOA.
Yeah, no way. Now, Tennessee, congratulations to you. You've secured your Second Amendment rights, and you've done it through local elections. See? And that's the importance of the local election. You see those pieces, were you really freaked out when they were kicking those ideas around in your state capitol? You probably just laughed and said, good luck with that, right?
It's very unlikely that any of that will pass.
Right. It's unlikely to ever get out of a committee.
Yeah.
Right. And there again, the residents of Tennessee have secured their Second Amendment rights by securing their state house and their state senate.
What do you think are some of the misconceptions with self-defense? And I mentioned like castle doctrine and things like that. Are there any things that you see in terms of like common trends with people believing one thing or believing a myth that relates to self-defense that you could speak to?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people don't really realize the 4 instances that you're typically allowed to use lethal force. And really, if you kind of go through state by state, you realize that these 4 are pretty common. I think some people overestimate when they can use lethal force, which can be highly problematic for you from a legal standpoint. I think some people underestimate when they can use lethal force, and that can be highly problematic for your future. So just in a nutshell, the 4 times you can use lethal force, and again, everyone needs to check with local state laws, but if you yourself are in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, if somebody else in your presence is in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, if you're having a felony being committed upon your person, or you're having a felony being committed inside your home. Those are the four, and you as as law enforcement, you probably knew that stuff, right? Beyond that, there really isn't a lot of other instances in which we're allowed to use lethal force.
And I think that's why it's also important for people to carry less than lethal means on them.
Yes.
Because there are plenty of situations. I mentioned this to some people of like, let's imagine you're in a location where you cannot retreat, and someone says that they want to fight you, they want to fist fight you. Now, me personally, I think that if you're in that situation and you have not either provoked this person and you've done everything you can to disengage with this person and they still want to fight you, I don't think you should be compelled to fight. And I think you should be able to stop them before they go hands-on. Because as someone who has done jiu-jitsu, I understand that like by the time some people get their hands on you, it may be too late, and now you're beyond the point of being able to get your gun regardless. However, the courts a lot of times don't understand that. They don't understand the dynamics of a force-on-force type situation, and so having pepper spray or a 1,000 lumen flashlight to be able to disorient someone, like those sort of things, I think are so important. And just people that think like, "What? I don't need to know how to fight, or I don't need to know how to run because I have my gun on me." It's like, well, you're just a future client for some attorney, because that's a very, very bad mindset to have.
The other thing I want everyone to understand is that just because you have the right to do something doesn't mean it's doing the right thing, okay? So, for example, take a duty to retreat state, a no duty to retreat state, okay? Got aggressive panhandler comes up to you and just and you don't want to deal with it, so you just basically pepper spray him instantly. Is it a good use of force? I don't know, maybe, maybe not. But if you tell the guy, "Hey, leave me alone," and you try to leave, and you go 3 blocks down the street, you're trying to retreat, and he continues after you, and ultimately then you end up using some force against him, is that a lawful use of force? Absolutely. There's not a prosecutor in America that's going to charge that case because you were trying to get away from the thing. The guy continued after you. So that's why it's really important to do the tactical stuff so you know how to do the right things, and then you do the legal training so you know what you have the right to do.
Yeah, a lot of people let their ego get in the way, and they think that because they have that weapon, be it non-lethal weapon or a firearm, that they basically they can do whatever they want. And
what's the best way to manage conflict? Avoid it.
Yeah, avoid it entirely. Don't go in the wrong places with the wrong people.
Yeah, and the one that really gets me is the road rage, because what typically is somebody accidentally cuts somebody else off. It's an accident. I've done it. We're just not paying attention. You may have done it in a patrol car one time. You just weren't paying attention, right?
Never.
Right. Okay, we'll go with that today. But, it just stuff happens. And then, of course, the person wants to throw a middle finger at them. And, okay, but what's the threat at this point to anybody? There's no threat anywhere. But now we got to start waving guns out the window at each other, and things have completely escalated. And there was never a threat to either party.
Yeah. Well, and people that want to jump into violence like that, I think oftentimes are very unfamiliar with violence and the collateral consequences. We had some people down the street that are in a different neighborhood, and their vehicle outside was being broken into. And the guy tried to confront the person. And I don't know if he had his gun or what, but he tried to confront the person, and the person shot at him. Thankfully missed, thankfully he missed entirely. But I mean, that round could have gone through the house and killed his kid inside. And I just thinking like the horror of going out and confronting someone, they shoot and they miss, and all of a sudden you're like, why isn't my kid coming downstairs? You go upstairs and they're, blood's all over their bed because they got shot through the wall. It's like, people don't think about that and those second and third order consequences of getting involved in that. You can do everything right and still get shot in the face.
Yeah, and what makes the problem even worse is back in the day, someone was trying to break into your car, you could just call the police, and then the police would show up and take care of it. And nowadays in many communities, you can call the cops all day, all night. They ain't coming.
Yeah.
It's not that they don't want to be there. They would be there in a nanosecond if they could. It's just there's not enough of them out on the street right now. That's the problem.
Yeah. Those jurisdictions are just enabling crime and making it so much worse for the citizens that live there. It's awful.
Yeah. That's one of these days you guys may turn on YouTube, see my channel. It's called Idaho Gun Law.
How about Tennessee gun law?
Idaho's a great state too, man. There's a lot going on there.
Are there any current books you're reading right now that either relate to this or any other topics?
No, I haven't read a lot of good books. Right now I'm reading Barnett v. Raoul.
Okay.
And we're going to be reading Oregon House Bill 2005 later today, so I can get the folks in Oregon all educated on that stuff down there.
Awesome. What's that one over?
So that is Oregon's attempt to do away with 80% lowers, undetectable, untraceable firearms. The interesting thing is that in Oregon, if you have a firearm that you've built from an 80% lower, you will need to have it serialized no later than July 13th. Otherwise, you will be in violation of the law. So they didn't grandfather anything in.
Wow.
Yeah. So buckle up, Oregon.
What's the process for that? If someone was going to get it
A
serialized?
gunsmith who's also a licensed FFL, and the state law then actually has a method by which they would engrave it, and there's a linear fashion for how the serial numbers would work. We passed something very similar to this in Washington a couple years ago, but we only included any firearm that was manufactured July 1st, 2019 and later. And of course, if they're all made from 80% lowers, how do you
how do you know?
Never manufactured, right? So I don't think our law had the impact that the drafters intended it to.
Yeah, I was just talking to a buddy on the phone right before we got on this call, and he wants to move out to Colorado. I don't know why, but he wants to. I mean, he wants to go live in the mountains and do it.
It's pretty as can be.
It is beautiful and go overlanding and stuff like that. But he said he asked. He was at one of the gun stores because they visited out there, and he was asking about the magazines because they had like high capacity or 10 plus capacity magazines, and he asked him about that, and then they said, well, the way it works is they said that all magazines beyond or all previous magazines were grandfathered in, but magazines don't have a manufacturer date, so there's really no way to tell.
Yeah. So just word to the wise, out here in Washington, we had some companies do that, and what the Attorney General does is he sends investigators in, they buy the magazines, and then the way we passed our high capacity magazine ban is we said that any offer for sale or selling of them, it is a violation of the Washington State Consumer Protection Act. And so the Attorney General can now fine you $7,500 per magazine if you're caught selling them in the state of Washington. But I want you to keep an eye on Washington's magazine ban because I think we're going to get an injunction on it later this week.
Wow.
I think we're going to have a little Freedom Week out here in Washington for a few days.
Really?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on that.
It'll only last for a few days. We're kind of hoping that the judge issues it like Friday afternoon because then the Attorney General can't do anything about it until like Monday morning. It'll give all the folks here in Washington a weekend to live like an American again.
That's awesome. Are there any gun laws either in Washington or other states that you're familiar with that would shock most people if they heard about it, if they were aware of it?
Well, a couple of the ones were in California, and California has had a horrific year in the Court of Appeals. Absolutely. They are the New York Jets of appeal cases right now. So California had a rule where you could only purchase one firearm every 30 days. Saving lives. That was struck down. California also had a law that required you to go through a background check in order to purchase ammunition.
Wow.
Yeah. And of course, there was waiting periods established. So you go in to buy a box of 50, 115 grain 9mm.
Yeah.
And they do out the back, you fill out your 4473, all of this crap, and then they'll call you in a week. Hey, come pick up your box of 50.
Oh my gosh, I cannot imagine that.
Yeah, I tell you, here's the big trend I think everyone needs to keep their eyes on. And there's some cases coming out now, and I really like where these cases are going, is this whole concealed carry reciprocity issue. So like, you're a Tennessee resident, I'm a Washington resident. If we had to go do business for a whole month in California, do you realize that there is no way that we could legally arm ourselves or carry a firearm in the state of California ever? There's no circumstance under which we can ever establish that lawfully.
Yeah.
Yet not all of our other constitutional rights go with us when we go to California. Right? And so we got 3 states right now, California, New York, and Hawaii, that do not offer out-of-state concealed carries and do not have any reciprocity agreements with any state, which means those 3 states, you can never arm yourself in that state unless you're a resident of that state. That is going to be an area of challenge that I believe the Supreme Court is going to strike down in the next couple of years. And I think we're going to be moving more towards some kind of a standardized national concealed carry reciprocity.
I hope.
Yeah.
That needs to happen. Even when I was a police officer, I went to Lake Tahoe for a week, and I called ahead of time. I called the local sheriff's department and just kind of get an idea of like. Yeah. I mean, I know under Leosa I could carry,
right?
But
it's as a law enforcement, but you wanted to make sure you were totally above board.
But also, you know, I found out that Leosa doesn't cover magazines, so I couldn't actually carry my duty weapon, which is a Glock 17, and that was crazy. But one of the guys I spoke to, he was a sheriff's deputy, and I can't remember the county now, but he mentioned that this county's SWAT team went to go train in this county at a range and brought their automatic weapons. And that other county actually sees their automatic weapons, the police department SWAT team's automatic weapons. I'm like, what world are you living in, man? Like,
all about saving lives.
Yeah. Something that bugs me is you have police officers that claim to be pro 2A, and they claim to hate all the things the ATF's doing and the anti-gun legislative push that we have right now, but then they'll use that sometimes. They'll use gun laws as a tool to be able to do certain things, and I always hated that. It's a lack of integrity, you know, because...
Well, you want to know something that the National Police Association talked about in the memorandum that's out on the video right now, today's video, is that so frequently the people who are the most vocal to disarm us are standing there surrounded by armed bodyguards while they're making that speech.
Yeah.
So, you know, guns are good enough to protect their lives, but your life, that's not worth protecting.
Because they're more important.
They're more important
than the subjects.
They make movies. Yeah.
And sometimes in the process of making those movies, they accidentally shoot a camera person in the face.
Yeah, that's true. But hey, I want you to know you didn't pull the trigger.
Yeah.
You ever had a guy? Hey, you probably been around firearms more. I've been around firearms a lot. You're law enforcement. You've been around. Ever had a gun go off by itself, just sitting there, and all of a sudden it just pops off by itself?
Not just sitting there, but if it's a SIG and you drop them the right way.
Yeah, there's one SIG. I know, not really
but no, something has to happen.
There has to be some other event contemporaneous with it. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you this: if someone is in a self-defense situation, be it a shooting or other use of force, can you kind of walk them through the steps and like what they should do and what they should expect to happen? And if you ever find yourself in a situation like this where you have to use deadly force to defend yourself or to defend someone else, then you're going to want a good legal team defending you after the fact. And that's why I trust attorneys on retainer. And if you want to see how AOR compares to those other CCW insurance providers, then scan this QR code or check out my affiliate link in the description. They have individual and family plans so that you will be legally protected should you ever need to protect your life or someone else's life. And don't forget to use promo code DAD to save $25 on your initial sign up.
Yeah, great question. I just spent the weekend down almost in Oregon, in Vancouver, Washington, Camas, Washington. Did 3 presentations down there on self-defense laws in Washington State, and this is actually how we conclude the program, okay? And so bear with me, it'll take a few minutes, but I really want everyone to understand this. The first thing that everyone needs to understand is even though we hold law enforcement officers to a very high standard, which I think is and oftentimes justifiable, we also forget so frequently that they are human beings just like the rest of us, which means that when they get a call that there has been a shooting or there's an active shooting and they have to go to it, we must recognize the emotional state that they arrive at the scene, because it's the exact same emotional state that we would all be in as well. Every human being. I don't care the most veteran officer has been on the SWAT team for 25 years. He still wants to go home to his family that night. You never know, and you probably know this way better than I will, right? So that heightened emotional thing we have to be mindful of. So if you have, in fact, been involved in a lawful self-defense shooting, the first thing you need to do, I always advise, is reholster the firearm in the exact condition it was at the time of the last discharge. Secondly, make sure that you can remain at the scene. If the scene gets so volatile that you remaining at the scene might result in more violence, then I would say extract yourself. And when I say extract yourself, I don't mean go to Mexico. What I mean is just, go a couple blocks down the street. The third thing you need to do is you need to call 911. A lot of people don't understand why you need to call 911. They have their own theories, but the bottom line is that if you have lawfully pulled the trigger on somebody, you most certainly have been the victim of a crime. You've most certainly been the victim of a very serious crime. and that needs to be reported to 911 immediately. So, hey, someone just tried to rob me, and now we need medical attention, okay? A lot of people say, should I tell them that I shot the person? Don't worry, law enforcement will figure that out in no time when they get there, okay? It's pretty easy to recreate
The one that has more holes in them than the other people.
Yeah, right, exactly. Now, when law, and I really want people to understand that when you have been involved in what you believe is a righteous self-defense situation, you're going to want to sell that story immediately. Your emotional reaction is, I got to sell the righteousness of this right away. But you're going to say things that you probably don't want to be saying, and you're going to be in an emotional state where, candidly, you shouldn't be talking to anybody. And talk to any of your law enforcement friends, and they'll tell you that if they're involved in a department shooting, and they could have 5 of their colleagues standing there watching it happen going, that was the most lawful shot I've ever seen in the history of Tennessee, it's going to be days before you ever sit down and talk to your department. You'll talk to your guild attorney multiple times before you ever sit down to talk to the department. So why would a civilian not handle something in a similar fashion? So don't stay on the phone with the 911 operator. Once you've provided the essential information, the location, your name, date of birth, maybe some items of clothing so they can spot you when they get there, that's really the only information you need to provide. When law enforcement does arrive, and this is really critical for people, you need to understand that that's a very critical window of time. They know they have an armed assailant out there. They know that there has been a shooting, and they're going to want to control that situation as fast as humanly possible for their own safety and everyone else's. So you need to be able to identify yourself to law enforcement. I usually recommend that you walk up to them with your hands on your head. If I'd been in the situation, my firearm would be right appendix. If you were the officer and you asked me, are you armed? I would be like, yes, there's one here on my right appendix, but I wouldn't.
Yeah, don't grab it.
No, I didn't like it right down here on my right appendix. At that point, you're going to start ordering me to however you've been trained to disarm me, which might even be ordering me on the ground, putting me in handcuffs, and then disarming me. And I tell everybody, play along. Okay, this is a really critical window of time. And then at that point, you're going to want to sell the righteousness of the story, but really the only thing you should be saying to law enforcement is, I cannot and I'm not going to make any statements right now until I've had a chance to speak with my lawyer first. A lot of people think that police officers are immediately like, oh, the guy's guilty, he's lawyering up, but you've done this long enough to know that that doesning mean anything other than they know how to do this correctly.
It's all about how you say it too.
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to talk to you. Get away from me.
I ain't saying a damn thing till I talk to my lawyer.
Yeah.
That's one thing versus, hey, officer, it's not that I don't want to talk to you. It's just that I really need to talk to my lawyer first. Okay.
And also being like, thanking them for getting there. Like, hey, thank you guys for showing up. Like, showing like gratitude and like instantly building rapport with them would go a long way.
If the threat has been stopped, because we shoot to stop the threat, right? If the threat's been stopped and now the threat needs medical attention, maybe we should be asking for medical attention as well. When I'm doing these cases, if I got a frantic client on the phone who's like, please get an ambulance here, please get an ambulance here, okay, that again plays into the theory that my guy didn't want to shoot him and only shot to stop the threat.
Yeah.
It was not intending. Now, sometimes that does result in lethal consequences, but that's the way it goes sometimes, right?
Yeah. Don't ask for the coroner to show up.
Right.
What are your thoughts, speaking of medical attention, what are your thoughts on the person themselves, even if they haven't been shot, immediately asking for medical attention? Like to get evaluated, because sometimes people have heart attacks after a stressful incident.
Yeah, well, I do think that they should absolutely be checked out. You don't know what is happening with you. This is something that, nobody really trains for. Everyone thinks they go to the range all the time to train for it. And it's like, yeah, but that piece of paper ain't shooting back at you. So, it's a little different.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should be checked out. But again, you want to be careful because any statements that you're making to fire personnel with police officers standing around are not confidential statements.
Right. Yeah, and they're going to talk to the police.
And yes, fire personnel will always talk to the police. Police will always talk to the fire. I've watched enough dash cam to know that the first thing you guys do when you get to the scene is walk up to the fire. Hey, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Right? And they'll tell you because they usually are the first ones there. They've assessed the situation.
And they work together often. They know each other. They're buddies. I mean,
yeah, you guys have been on 20 calls in the last 2 months together, right? So,
So after that, what should people expect to be, obviously expect to be disarmed? Should they expect to be arrested? detained,
Yeah, well, you will
interviewed?
most certainly be disarmed. The firearm will likely be taken into evidence. In Washington State, they would have to take it into evidence, run a background check on you, make sure you were lawfully allowed to be in possession of the firearm. I've had clients who have been arrested because it's just kind of a close call, and I think law enforcement would rather book you in and then maybe kick you loose versus realize, crap, we should have booked that guy, and now he's halfway to Australia. I have had many clients also where law enforcement came out and maybe there was existence of eyewitnesses, and between the eyewitnesses and the ballistics and the blood splatter and all that, it's like, looks like a pretty good shoot here, and they've gone home that night. So
Yeah, we've had one of those before. I don't even think we disarmed the person. It was so good.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, well, yeah.
But it is Tennessee.
Yeah, well, I had one at a restaurant in downtown Seattle where my guy's just sitting at this late night diner and all hell breaks out in the booth next to him, and he ends up shooting one of the guys in the next booth in self-defense. He called me at 2 a.m, and I got all this background chatter. I'm like, what's all this other noise? Like, oh, it's just all the detectives. I was like, well, do you think maybe we can talk privately for a minute? And so he goes into another room of the restaurant, and I was like, hey, how many cameras do they got on the ceiling there? And he looks up, and he's like, man, they got cameras everywhere. I was like, all right, let me talk to the detective. And I just talked to the detective. I was like, hey, man, just go talk to the manager, get the camera footage pulled, and tell me what happened. Right? Because the eye in the sky captured it. And I got a call about 45 minutes later. It's like, all right, your guy's going home.
Wow.
Because his story checked out.
Yeah.
He told the story, and the story was the truth, and the video captured the exact story.
Can you shed some light on the Miranda warning for people? Because some people are very confused. People that I've arrested are very confused, and then I would imagine a lot of viewers are very misled about, based on how Hollywood and TV shows it.
Yeah. So Miranda applies to custodial interrogation only. Custodial interrogation means you have actually been taken into custody, as in formally arrested, and then are having questions asked of you that are intended to elicit answers related to that investigation. Okay? So, you arrest a subject, you throw him in the back of your patrol car, you drive him down to the station, you throw him in a holding cell, and you let him sit there for a couple hours while you do paperwork, and then you get out and Mirandize him. Any problem with that? None whatsoever. Because during that whole time, you never asked him a question. Never asked him a question. Now, if he is like in the holding cell and you haven't Mirandized him yet, and he's like, okay, I'm sorry, I did it. Come on, man, let me out, I want to talk. And he's confessing, but it's not the product of any question. Those are admissible statements at that point. Right? Because that's not interrogation. He's just blah, blah, blah. Now, do I believe that...
Spontaneous utterance.
Spontaneous statements, right? So, now, do I believe that good law enforcement officers will Mirandize when the cuffs are going on? Yeah, that's the way I would advise officers to do it. But there may not be any questioning. So he pulled me over on the side of the road and was asking me questions and started asking me questions related to my drinking. You're not in custody at that point. So it is a form of interrogation that's taking place on the side of the road, yes, but it's not custodial interrogation.
Right.
That is Miranda. It does get, oh, he didn't advise me of my rights until we got to the station. All right. Yeah. So what, right? Now, if you confessed before he advised you, Miranda, hey, that may be really, really helpful. We might be able to get the confession out at that point, so long as the confession was in relation to a question that was asked of you.
Yep. Thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah.
Hopefully everyone was listening to that. You see these guns with, there are these designs and stuff on them, or Punisher and all this stuff. How much do you think that, I don't think it would help, but how much do you think that would hurt someone's case if they had a gun that had, we'll say, artwork on it that was indicative of this person was looking for a fight?
Well, yeah, and that's the argument they'll make, right?
Yeah.
That's the exact argument they'll make, is that this person was looking for a fight. So, if you put a green dot or a red dot on your firearm, that I don't, that's just making your firearm better fit for you. I even think some trigger modifications are not a big deal. Candidly, I think if you're buying really good handguns, you don't need.
You shouldn't have to, yeah.
Right? But yeah, you start dropping the Punisher, you're effed on there, middle finger on it, or things like that. Yeah, that's going to play into the prosecutor's theory, which always is you were out looking for trouble. You wanted to kill someone, right?
Yep.
And by the way, depending on the ammo you carry, if you carry hollow points like you're supposed to be carrying, the prosecutor will say you're carrying cop killer bullets
That explode
And
on
if you're
impact.
yeah. And if you're carrying ball ammo, then they're going to say that you were carrying military grade ammunition. That's how it works with the prosecutors. Yeah.
Just might want to steer away from the zombie killer branded ammunition because that.
Yeah. Well, what about the RIP round?
I'm not familiar with that one. The RIP.
Okay, so that's a 9. I've seen it 9mm. It comes in at like, I don't know, 72 grains or something like that because you should look it up.
Okay. But I'll post a picture on the video.
Yeah, put the RIP round. And of course, the name of the round is RIP.
Yeah.
So, could a prosecutor in some jurisdictions make an issue of that? Yeah, in some jurisdictions with the right jury, you could. You try that in Oklahoma City, it's probably going to be like, yeah, I'm going to go buy me some of those too. But
yeah. Well, it's also like with those gun modifications and custom gun painting and stuff, it's just more expense, just unnecessary expense. Save that money, spend it on training. And if your gun looks pretty, then it probably means you don't train with it. Like I had this guy one time that looked at my AR and it was all scratched to heck. And he was like, man, you don't take care of that thing. I was like, no, it's a work gun. Like this is what it looks like.
It's a tool.
It functions like it's supposed to function.
Yeah, it's a tool. Yeah, no, your everyday carry after a few years should be a little scuffed up. Mm-hmm. It should. I mean, it's just going. It's going with you everywhere. It's just going to get a little beat up, which is why you buy a good gun, so it can take a little bit of a pounding, a little bit of a beating, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The one thing I tell everyone, I noticed when I really was getting back into guns that the gun world is a little bit like the wine world, which is there's all these wine snobs, all these gun snobs always want to tell you, well, I'll tell you what you need, or that you're just like, oh, that wine's terrible. Well, if their palate says it tastes great, then you know what? To them, it tastes great. The best gun that you can ever carry is the one that you always put shots on target with.
Yep. Can you shoot it safely, accurately, and can you shoot it fast? And is reliable. I mean, and most modern guns are reliable. I mean, they're so good now.
Yeah, exactly. And you see some of the lower end manufacturers, I think, have really upped their game in the last few years as far as reliability. Taurus comes to mind. Taurus had a very bad reputation, and they're making pretty reliable firearms now.
Yeah. But just stick with Glock, folks.
What's that?
I said just stick with Glock, folks.
I'm a Smith & Wesson. My everyday carry is a Smith & Wesson.
What, like MMP?
Yeah, I got the M&P 2.0 metal frame.
Okay, yeah.
Yep, with the 4. And I'll tell you what I like about it is I like the heavier gun because it just sits so much more quieter in my hand, makes my follow-up shot just so much easier. It's a firearm that I really, really like that firearm.
Yeah, I got a 2.0, and I like it. It's a good, it's a really good gun. I mean, they're also similar, right? I mean, the internals are almost just identical when you look at them.
Yeah.
There's striker fire.
There's really only one way physically to make that happen in a package about that size. Yes. So,
And now with the Glock patent, I think it's run out now. So like everyone can basically, that's what PSA is doing. I mean, they're basically making Glock.
I've always been, what I've liked about Glocks is the ease of takedown. That takedown on the Glock is fantastic. I mean, you can take that thing down, unless you work for the ATF, you can take that thing down. Right? You can take that thing down in about 2 seconds.
Yeah, that video, oh my gosh. For those of you who don't know, I'll post a clip of it here.
Well, yeah, because, it would have been one thing if we'd been throwing like an old Ruger in front of him that has the takedown pin that you got to...
Or 1911 or something. Like
or something like that, This was a freaking Glock, and you couldn't do a takedown.
That's the people that are in charge of, like you said, that are in charge of making these rulings and interpretations on how the law is going to be applied.
We'll take a look at Director Dettelbach's answer to the question, define an assault weapon. What was his answer? I can't do that. I mean, these are the people that are going to try to disarm you.
Yeah. So I did a video a while back, and it was called, Does the ATF Make Laws? And obviously we know they don't write laws. However, if the laws have words and you change the definition of those words, then by de facto, you've made a law, right? Or you've at least changed the law. I mean, and can you speak to that a little bit and like that process and how that works?
Point. Yes, excellent point. Does the ATF technically draft legislation? No, they're an executive branch agency. They're an Article 2 branch agency. The offensive thing of what ATF does, and other alphabet agencies do this as well, is they suddenly just come up with these memorandum opinions or rulemaking orders where they're like, well, even though for the last 30 years we thought these words meant A, B, and C, upon further review, we now think that these words mean X, Y, and Z. The bump stock ban comes to mind, okay? And so suddenly you have thousands and thousands of Americans that own these things lawfully, that ATF had said at one point, totally cool, totally fine. And then with one rulemaking order, suddenly all of these people become felons. Now, they may call that a rulemaking order, but when we are suddenly turning people into criminals overnight, that is an act of legislation.
Yes.
It absolutely positively is. But that can only be done by an Article 1 branch of government. And now we're getting back to some of the things that we've seen the Supreme Court do, reining in last year, West Virginia versus EPA, big case that came out last year, the Loper Bright case that we talked about earlier today. We're going to hopefully see that ability to do that just really reined in.
Yeah, I hope so. And also with the machine guns.
You know, the pistol brace. They said for years pistol braces are fine. Yeah, they're fine. Yeah, it's cool. No big deal. Suddenly one day, nope. If you got a pistol brace, it's an SBR. Right? And that subjects you now to taxation and additional regulation. And if you're in possession of an NFA item, but you haven't done all the paperwork, and that subjects you to prison time. I mean, just by a rule-making order. And going back to the bump stock thing, you know, with I've been very critical of President Trump on this because candidly that genie was let out of the bottle by him. After that horrific shooting in Las Vegas, the political will was there to pass a bump stock ban through Congress. There is no way that some of those Republican representatives or senators in the moderate districts would have been able to be like, no, I'm not backing that. They were backed into a corner in those couple of weeks. And yeah, there may have been some challenges to the bump stock ban about whether it was permissible under the Second Amendment. But what has the bump stock ban been thrown out over? It's about the way it was implemented. Not what was done, but how it was done. And that playbook, which had never been used, Obama didn't even use that playbook, okay, has now been used by the Biden administration multiple times. Genie got let out of the bottle.
The political myopia we have where whenever someone's guy's in office and they're passing these executive orders, they like it. They don't have a problem with it. And then the other guy gets in office and they've already set the precedent, so then they take advantage of it and they don't like it. It's like, people, we have a system of checks and balances for a reason, and it's to prevent that from happening.
Just like we don't like the fact that we got TikTok kicking around. Too many of our young people are getting onto TikTok. So what's our solution going to be? Ban it? What's next on the list? What happens when they just decide, like, you know, half those YouTube channels, that Washington Gun Law channel, that Four Boxes Diner channel, that Armed Scholar channel, misinformation. They got to go. That's a dangerous, slippery slope that we're creeping towards.
People, to stay abreast of that slippery slope and what's going on, you need to watch Bill's channel. I'm going to have links in the description. Bill, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I really do appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, so best way to find me, it's, hey, free legal advice. How often the lawyer's doing things for free? It's on YouTube. We're at Washington Gun Law. We're at Washington Gun Law on Facebook and Instagram, and then we're at Gun Washington on Twitter. I got Gun Law Jr. running the Facebook and Instagram account, so I don't know what's going on over there. I'll run Twitter and Facebook. And if you guys ever have any ideas or things going on in your state that you want me to geek out on with you and help you understand, send me a message. Some of the best videos I ever came up with weren't really actually my ideas.
Well, awesome. I'll have those links in the description. Bill, thanks again. And guys, thank you so much for watching. And as always, train to a higher standard.